Welcome to this segment of Indie Creators brought to you by BeSimply. And today we have special guest Robert Mulhall from Kirpalu Center for Yoga and Health. He is the chief and he is committed to creating a more beautiful world. Without further ado, let's dive in with Robert.
Picturing your warm smile.
Appreciate you being here. I'm so excited to have you. I want to maybe dive in, I thought intuitively, if you can share with the listeners a little bit about how you intersected, a man of numbers, Kirpalu, like where are the ley lines that brought you to them and them to you?
Yeah, there's so much to that answer. I was born and raised in Ireland. And grew up in a family and went to an elementary and high school that was very inspired by the spiritual teachings of the East. Mm. So I had an upbringing and an immersion in what we teach at Kirpalu basically from a very young age, but all the way in Ireland. Mm. And it was that combined with a real sort of ethos of service in my family and in that school that led me on a path that some might see as meandering, but for me, I've always treated it as a life and career as a jungle gym to be explored, not just a ladder to climb. Mm-hmm. And so that brought me to the numbers world of PricewaterhouseCoopers and big business and trying to understand how businesses work, to the worlds of leadership development. And how do you help combine these contemplative practices and ancient wisdom with modern leadership frameworks to activate better leadership in our world? Mm-hmm. To working in India and Africa for many years, supporting women and children accessing health services, and then into organizational change and consulting and transformation and executive coaching. And through that, Kirpalu hired me back in 2018. And I worked for about a year as a consultant, supporting the CEO at the time and the board and different teams to go through a cultural transformation and, do some. The organization did some beautiful work at that time to find deeper alignment within itself. And then in that process, I was asked to join as a VP of programming and strategy, and then did that for about 9 months, and then the pandemic hit and we closed our doors. And several months into that process, I was asked to be the CEO and took on at a very interesting time. Really, November 2020 was when I kind of took on the reins, and it was a time of deep uncertainty. Vaccines hadn't been rolled out. Vaccines weren't even really clear if they were going to be working or not. And we were shut, and we laid off most of our team, and we didn't really know what was next.
Mm-hmm. So you've been at stormy seas for in a place that encourages you to be still. So how did your practices help you through everything that you've traversed over the past several years?
Yeah, I was talking to a few other executive directors, CEOs recently, and we asked each other this question: how's your care for yourself going? What grade would you give yourself? Mm. And everybody said, a lot of people said C, C minus, D plus, maybe there was a B minus in there. And somebody asked me, and I just said a non-negotiable A, because I just couldn't do this job if I wasn't looking after myself, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I say those as if they're separate from each other, but they're all completely bound up and intertwined together. Yeah. So I, as I said, I had this long, rich history of practice and exposure to these practices from a young age. And so practice is just part of my day. It's just a non-negotiable. I sit every morning in meditation and then pray, and sometimes I'll journal with that. And then I'll move my body in some way, whether that's sort of exercise or it's yoga asana or it's dance, and sing with my beautiful 5-year-old boy, and then just try to take care of the vehicle that I get to use, and do that not just at the beginning of the day, but during the day. You know, at work, are there moments, and we do this at Kirpalu all the time, where we come back to our center. And if I wasn't doing that regularly, I would not be a very pleasant person to work with.
Aho,
Yeah.
bravo. I think a lot, I'm glad you checked in with people, because I would say a lot of people have felt more like they've been on a marathon and a fever dream, and pivoting left, right, in center throughout this. I call it the brouhaha. It's like a more gentle name. Over the past several years. So that's beautiful that you walk the talk. I love it. And as you all are reemerging, what are you finding is the kind of the call? What are people requesting now that they're in a kind of recovery regeneration process?
Yeah. So August 2023 is the 2-year mark of reopening, and we're hearing and seeing quite a few things. People are very hungry to be back together in community. Online has been fantastic, and we continue to serve many people online, and that allows us to reach people and have greater access, which is fantastic. And there's a hunger for people to be together and practice together. And so people are looking for community. They're also a lot of people are really affected by sleep right now. So we're doing a lot of programming and support around helping people reset their nervous systems so that they can down-regulate. That's the whole experience here, is down-regulate your nervous system, slow down, eat great food, be held in this incredibly healing land, and then be in these experiences in the program room that help you ask and answer some big questions, help you see and release something that maybe needs to be healed, maybe make a decision or a commitment about some sort of transformation in your life. And so people, when people first came, they really just needed to be held, and like high levels of anxiety in folks. And it was just a big release. And then we started to realize that after that initial release, people really wanted to grieve. So we've been running grief share circles for people on a regular basis now. That's all online. And then as time has gone on, there's the continuing of people feeling high anxiety. There's the continuation of people needing to really grieve. And then people are starting to step back into, what else? What else is my life inviting me into? What do I want to be curious about? What do I want to explore? And so I think people are allowing themselves a little bit more of that also, which is wonderful.
Beautiful. And how could you share with the listeners to encourage them? Because this is, when there's great loss, we go through these stages of grief and anger, and then a phase that is action or retraction. But if we're encouraging people to go back into action and rebuild trust, what's a technique you could share with people to start to trust themselves and maybe the world at large?
I think this whole idea of trust is, if we don't trust ourselves, it's very hard to trust anybody else. That's not saying anything particularly new there, but how much time are we really spending with ourselves? How much time are we spending with our bodies? And we're spending a whole lot of time with our minds and our thinking minds, but are we spending enough time with our bodies? One of the big things we do here at Kirpalu is slow people down and get them back in their bodies, whether that's through the physical aspects of yoga, through sitting meditation, through mindful outdoor experiences like kayaking and hiking, etc., or through our yoga dance and movement. And get in your body. My body is full of wisdom that I am often slow to hear. And I've got lots of examples of that. One quick one is when my father died 7 years ago, the year after he passed. I was out cycling and I stubbed my toe as I was getting off the bike, and it was excruciatingly painful. And then about 30 minutes later, I hit that toe again. And this is at the point of like, I thought I was going to throw up. I was in so much pain on this one toe. I'm pretty sure it had broken at this stage. And 5 minutes later, I know that I have to move again. I have to walk somewhere. So I decide that I'm going to walk so slowly and so mindfully that there's no way that I could possibly stub my toe. And I was doing that. And after about 4 steps, somehow it was like something else took over and stubbed my toe. I was walking so slowly and so mindfully, and I stubbed my toe again. The pain was so bad that I was lying on the floor on my back. And I just put my hand on my chest, and I could feel the tears flowing from the pain. And I just said, "What are you trying to tell me?" Because I don't usually stub my toe 3 times in a row, especially when I'm being so careful. And my body just said to me, says, "You're missing your dad. Feel it." And I was lying on my back and I just started to weep. I just started to weep and weep and weep. And that was my body's sort of dramatic way of getting my attention, because I wasn't going slow enough to actually feel and listen to what was going on. And that took me into a whole beautiful exploration around body and its wisdom. And I think that's a big place where people can start, is to start to listen to our bodies. I think the other place for me that's been so valuable is nature. Maybe I'm not always willing to trust what my mind is telling me. But again, I'm Irish, so we grew up with this cosmology that everything is your relation, and very similar to many other indigenous sort of teachings and traditions, that everything is our relation. And so he goes, I spend time with my back against a tree, and then I'll maybe ask it a question. You know, what wisdom do you have to share right now? And there's an ability to trust that because it somehow feels softer sometimes than my thinking mind, what my thinking mind has to say. And so those two have been incredibly powerful. And then, you know, as people come into community again, and as they start to trust themselves more, I think it really is about, how do we find our humanity again? We have, in this country, in the United States, we have decided that it is more important to be right, and it is more important to be divided than it is to be together. And that does not lead, the trajectory of that is not good. It is not healthy, and it is not balanced, and it is not, it's not peaceful. And, you know, I come from Ireland, where for a long, long time, people had gotten to such a point of losing the humanity of the person in front of them that, you know, thousands and thousands of people died over decades. And there's a lot of complexity to all of these things, of course. But, you know, I feel like we're in this place in the US where everything is now a point of division. Everything can be a point of division. And it's everything's becoming a point of division because internally we're so divided. And again, at Kirpalu, we're in the work and the business of community. We're in the work and the business of looking at that division and the disconnection that leads to division, the disconnection from self, from source, from earth, and from community. And so how do we help people come back into a journey of connection, connecting to ourselves, our own wisdom, our own beauty, our own enoughness, connecting to the beauty, wisdom, and enoughness of community, of this earth and nature, and of source, however you hold that word to be. And when we can be connected, when I'm connected with those things, when we're all connected with those things, there's a greater chance of us being able to listen to each other, a greater chance of us being able to maybe actually learn from each other, even if we have historically held very different political or social ideologies, but that there's always something to learn from somebody. even if it's just about
Absolutely.
you and your reactions. But
Mm.
no matter what side of a political conversation you're on, there's not a lot of listening going on. And
Okay.
used to run these programs in South Africa, leadership programs in South Africa, and one of the stories that always stood out for me was there was the Black Consciousness movement, which was the younger freedom fighters in South Africa fighting against apartheid that were kind of coming of age in the 80s. And then the ANC, the African National Congress, who had been really imprisoned since the 60s, and they were the elders like Nelson Mandela, etc. And when these younger people with all of this energy and this freshness and this sort of independence and autonomy were starting to be imprisoned in Robben Island with the older ANC folks who had sort of held this sort of elder status and had held this importance in the movement, the young folks were like, who are you? You're not out on the streets. Your friends aren't the ones dying. We've been leading this fight. You've all been locked away. And a lot of the ANC guys were very put off by this. They felt very disrespected. They didn't feel honored by the work and service that they and sacrifice that they'd given over so many years beforehand, before many of these people were born. And Nelson Mandela, in all of his wisdom, he said, let's go and listen to them. That was the response. It wasn't how dare they, who these young upstarts think, who they think they are. It was like, let's go listen. And they went and listened. And through that listening, what happened was, like so many movements, there's usually a fractioning, but they didn't. They actually held it together. And the Black Consciousness movement of Steve Biko led by Steve Biko, and the ANC movement led by Mandela and the others, they held a unity together, even if they shared differences in some tactics, etc., and strategies. Because they were willing to listen to each other, and you can only listen to somebody when you remember their humanity.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah. And you share something really important, because I always share with everyone that no matter, even during the brouhaha or politics or whatever, when there's opposing solutions, when really there's a 360-degree wheel we could approach to find a solution, the common denominator is fear. And so everyone's acting out of their own fear, not typically like, okay, let's be rational here. It's just like, this is my solution to the fear and so forth.
Right.
So can you share a little bit about how to, when accessing humanity, how to really make peace with one's own fear? Because I feel that gives us more capacity to listen. Because we kind of sent fear up into the apple tree to hang out, so we could have a conversation.
Yeah. I think there's lots of different ways to do it. In my own practice, I take a few different approaches. One is when I notice fear or anger or shame or any of those beautiful, normal emotions that come up all the time.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to get rid of them and aim for perfection, which is a dead end street that's full of just hard knocks, basically. I do a few things. So one is I check in to see how much of this is mine. So is this truly personal fear, or is this ancestral fear? Is this collective fear? Is this the fear of the person in front of me and I just feel it because I'm sort of wired up that way? So I check in how much is mine. Okay. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that's not mine. Okay. I'll allow that to be owned by the person who owns that, and just try to like let something go a little bit. And sometimes that just creates a little bit more space inside of me as I've let go of the additional burden that I put on my shoulders of holding all of the fear in this situation on my shoulders. And then when there's plenty of times when there's still fear there, I'll sort of take a few different angles, and it sort of depends on what space I'm in. One angle is just, oh, hey, sweetheart, I see you. Okay, sweetheart. You can come, you can sit around the table with us. You don't get to drive the bus, but you can be here. And just sort of very, very tenderly saying, oh, it's okay, sweetheart. There you are. I see you. Yeah. And then sometimes it's a sort of a Byron Katie approach of, oh, I'm feeling this. And then I go, well, what's the story behind that? What am I sort of building up around that sensation. It's like, well, this will never happen, or this terrible thing will happen, or whatever it is. I go, is that true? Do I 100% know that that's true? And it's always a no, because I'm projecting some idea into an unknown future. So I go, okay, so it's not actually true. It's not actually happening in this moment. Remember people, when, again, I'll keep talking about my dad because I love him so much, but when he was passing, people were like, are you not feeling so sad? I said, not yet. They're like, why not? And I said, because he's right here. I said, that will come. And everybody grieves in different ways. So that's not a judgment about people that feel sad before somebody leaves or transitions. But just for me, it was just like, no, he's here. I'm talking to him right now. I actually don't have anything to be sad about right now. So like, what's really true in this moment? So that deep, like, compassion of, it's okay, sweetheart. And what's really true, and sort of using the mind to inquire into that. And then that sort of fierce love, that sort of cutting sword of no, just no. The fear is coming up is like, no, you do not get to, you do not get to drive the bus in this moment.
Yeah.
I see you, I know what you are, no. I'm not going to stuff you down, but just no. And this is like, you know, talking to a puppy that you're trying to train and it's doing whatever it's doing. Yeah. And so those are the three kind of different little mini practices. And then the thing that really helps me is staying in the back half of my body. So most of my experiences of where my attention and my energy is literally in the front inch of my body. It's like here, it's here, it's here, it's all at the front. And can I, even in this moment, just notice where my energy is and then just let it sort of fall back into my body. So that I'm coming from behind here at the back of my heart, the back of my hara, and then coming through my whole body as I listen, as I speak, etc.
Beautiful. I like that. Yeah, it's kind of like when you go in Shavasana, like you get to feel your spine meet the mat and get to be completely from there. Exactly. So if you can share, as you were talking about fear and saying no, and you appear to be really connected to nature, share with the listeners the purpose of fear in nature as you've observed it.
The purpose of fear in nature?
Yeah, like as you've observed it from your life experiences.
Oh, that's a good question. And, you know, the truth is, we are nature also. So when you ask me that question, I'll keep the human being in mind as much as the dog being, or the sheep being, or the deer being.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I've noticed about fear in nature, both in my own human nature and the sort of the rest of nature, is that it's there, just like anger. It's there to sort of signal something to us, signaling something to me about. I feel like maybe I'm, you know, over the edge of something. I'm feeling like maybe I'm pushing myself too hard, or I'm crossing a boundary. So that's kind of how it sort of shows up for me a lot of the time, or how I kind of use it. It was like, oh, okay, here's this thing. And then I also, just like I was saying about the body, I think it's this incredible, when we can notice it and sort of maybe run some of the tools and techniques to soften and create a bit more space so I can stay present and in my body and grounded in a conversation of listening or whatever. But can I also use fear to sort of turn that camera around on myself and to become more, to use it as an opportunity to become even more aware of what's happening inside, what is the inner state of being. And so when I'm afraid of something, usually there's something that feels at stake for me as an individual. So the Robert part of me is really wanting something to go a certain way. And more and more and more, as I do this job and I continue to live into my practices, I seem to be getting invited into deeper and deeper uncertainty in life. It's just And I think that's kind of how life is going to unfold for us as a planet, and that we are just going to have more and more uncertainty. And so if that's true with climate and with all the other things that are happening, if there's going to be deeper uncertainty, what are the practices and the sort of cosmological worldview that's going to support thriving in uncertainty? And a lot of the time we're still trying to like control and box and structure and keep everything in its place. But for me, a big piece of it is kind of comes up in this quote of show up fully, serve fully, and then surrender fully. And that idea of surrendering, really surrendering the outcome. It's been, I think, one of the biggest leadership lessons that I've had over the last 3 years is, can I show up so fully to this work and serve so fully and then surrender the outcome? Because it's all much bigger than me anyway. And if I release myself of that burden of it has to look a certain way, or it has to sort of end a certain way or conclude a certain way, then I'm sort of leaning more away from fear and into faith. And that there is something beautiful unfolding here. Or even if it doesn't feel beautiful or look beautiful, that there is something unfolding here. And I'm going to choose to trust what is unfolding. And I get that that's like, I've got lots of friends that are like, I don't trust what's unfolding. It's like, great, that's beautiful. That's your path. My path is different. Mine's not better than yours. Yours is not better than mine. It's just a different way of seeing the world and a different way of wanting to be in the world. And so for me, it's like, okay, no matter what, and life's thrown me plenty of heartbreaks and lots of curveballs, and I have lots of privilege in my life too. But can I trust that my life is unfolding just for me? I can't talk about anybody else's life, but just for me, can I hold the view that life is unfolding for me in the way that somehow I really wanted it to? Somehow that this was the way that was going to help me find my deepest liberation if I worked with all of these things that have happened in my life. And again, I could never extrapolate that idea or principle onto anybody else's life, but for mine, it feels like a good way to look at it.
Absolutely. Well, you're touching on a little bit about cause and effect in a roundabout way. When we have trust and faith, and maybe understand that concept, for some, it might be foreign or simplistic, meaning if I throw a rock in the pond, it leaves some rings. But can you share a little bit about responsibility, like right now, as we're coming together, you're welcoming humanity to come together and have conversation and unite in a way that could be more mindful? Because I always said during this whole process, we all co-created the reality that we landed in 3 years ago, and the one that we co-created in our response to it, which to your point was maybe not our highest and best, because we were reacting to some unknowns or fear. So if you can share a little bit about how to be more self-aware, and you've given us some great techniques, but moving forward as a humanity and having compassion for one another, but really, it's sometimes hard, you're a numbers guy, 5, 10, 15-year forecasts. This is like an eternal forecast. So can you share a little bit how we could be more mindful with that forecast?
Yeah. And I'll just, before I answer that one, I'll just say that I was always struck by an answer. I think it was Eckhart Tolle. He said, we often look back at a decision or a moment in time and we say, oh, that was a bad thing to happen. And then a few years later, oh, I got a lot of learning from that. I'd want that to happen again. And 15 years later, oh, I don't know, wasn't such a great thing. And, I know there's plenty of beautiful old Zen stories about these kind of things. And people say, was our response to the pandemic a good one or not? I'm like, depends when we ask that question. Depends on the moment we ask that question. Because at a certain moment, a lot of people were saying, this is a great response. And then at another moment, people saying this is a terrible response, and another moment people were saying it was a good response, another moment it was a terrible response. So I'm curious to know what we'll be saying in 20 years about that. Somebody said, somebody once asked somebody, what do you think the impact of the French Revolution was? And he says, we'll see. Like, it's still, the ripple is still going on the French Revolution. The ripple will still continue from the pandemic and the response to the pandemic and our response to the response of the pandemic. But with all of those things, the reality is, we live in the westernized world. We live in a pretty dominant culture that is oppressive. It's oppressive to Black, Indigenous people of color. It's oppressive to folks who are in certain socioeconomic classes. It's oppressive to certain genders. It's oppressive to certain orientations. And anything that's oppressive is not sustainable. It's just not. Like, nature throws that out. History has shown that. The question, I think, is going to be just how long is it sustainable? And at what point will there be transformation? And how easeful will that transformation be or not? And whatever we do and however we move forward, I think there's three big lies that we all co-create as a society together. The first lie is that as individuals, we're not enough. That somehow we are, as an individual, we are fundamentally flawed, broken, missing. Like, it's like we're part of a jigsaw puzzle. We're almost a jigsaw puzzle, but there's all of these squares that are missing, all of these pieces that are missing. And you've got to spend your whole life trying to go out and find these squares, these parts of you to complete you, because you're not enough. The second lie is that we're all separate from each other. That we look different, we act different, we think differently, we sing differently, therefore we're different, and different means not the same. And then the third one is that we're sort of hopeless and there's nothing that can be done. Those three lies, I don't believe there's some, like, a small group of men in white suits that sort of try to keep that message going in the world. But I think we swim in those waters, and I think we sort of self-perpetuate it as a society. And at Kirpalu, we're constantly trying to change that idea. The idea from not enoughness to wholeness. That just as we are, at our inherent essential nature, we are whole, and we are complete, and we are beautiful. And yes, we are also at the same time on a developmental journey to show up with more skill, with right relationship, with more open and loving hearts, with less biases and racism, etc. All of these things. So this ongoing journey of development is true from a place of wholeness, not from a place of not enoughness. And then the second is that nothing is separate. It never has been, and it never will be. And yes, to the naked eye, it all looks very separate. But the ancient traditions have talked about this the oneness of all things, the inseparability of all things, and that we look like we are individual expressions, but we're individual expressions of an undivided whole. Like mushrooms that come up on the forest floor are just expressions of the mycelium that's unseen below the forest floor. And that science, quantum science, is now really starting to prove this, that there is nothing that's separate. It is just a dancing of molecules and atoms, etc. That happen for a moment or for a particular length of time, form a certain shape, and then move on. And then this final idea that on this one, and I firmly believe that if you look at all of the big sort of societal, social challenges we have, if you keep going down to the essence of them, this idea that we're separate from each other is a big part of why these things exist in the first place. Because if we truly understood, not just that we're like all connected and that we're all in this together, but that we are actually are all the same thing, that there's like in that big way that we are all the same thing. And that the oak tree in the field beside me is not just like my sort of theoretical or mythical relation, but it actually is me, then how I treat that tree and how I treat the land around it is going to be so different. And how I treat myself and how I treat the person in front of me is going to be so different. I remember running a program in Europe, and there was some people from Lebanon on it during some of the days of higher conflict in Lebanon. And one person just said, like, they would find it impossible to throw a bomb over the wall if they really knew and deeply believed in their bones that the person was themselves, that this idea that they were just another expression of who they were. They couldn't throw that bomb over the wall. And then this third idea that this third lie of we can't do anything is absolutely, we are here for a reason. Everybody on this planet right now is born on purpose, with a purpose. And that it's our work to serve and create a more beautiful world together, not just individually striving to sort of prove that we're enough, but collectively just to create something more beautiful. Because we all know in our hearts that that's possible, and we all know actually that's what everybody wants. Everybody wants a more peaceful world. Deep down, if you get close enough to their heart, that's what they'll say.
Yeah, the number one request I get is calm. People ask me, if I say, how do you want to feel? They're like, calm, which is peace. Go ahead.
Well, I was just on the calm. I was back home in Ireland a little while ago, and when I came back to the States, the palpable difference in the sort of collective nervous system here as opposed to in Europe. This feeling in Europe, and I didn't go to all countries in Europe, obviously, but where I was, this feeling that there is just, the nervous systems are more steady right now. And there's so much political uncertainty and all of these things in the United States, but there is a level of anxiety that seems very, very high here. And it really actually shocked me, the contrast coming back in again. It was like, oh, wow, there's very urgent work to be done around that right now.
Interesting you say that. I'm in California, and many people left because of many reasons. And I was talking to a good friend. She's in South Carolina, and she's like, everyone's, your contrast, like it'd be good, Europe to there is much calmer, because here we've been very oppressed during this process. And so the interesting, even in the United States, I think there's these varying degrees of nervousness, but very fascinating to examine and how we get back to that calm. I know we're running out of time, so I want to share, or I would like to ask one more question about how one finds their humanity first. Like, this is a big question, but how you would encourage someone to start and self-inquisition to find humanity from within. So I find if we can find that, it's a little bit easier for me to extend it to another. So if you have any tips that could help people to start, especially if they're, in a confrontational situation, or they lose it, meaning it's gone.
I always think there's two ways to approach this. One is the greatest way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So to actually give up this idea of finding your humanity and just start serving. And in that process, you'll remember something will wake up inside of you. And it'll be the gift as a result of the service. So that's one way that I think works incredibly well. And then for other people, they're just like, I just know that's not the step for me. And I think it's to really go in and do that work inside. And so for me, over the last little while, there's been a lot of work at looking at trying to be in a place of deeper forgiveness and seeing the anger inside of me, and noticing that forgiveness that I'm looking for and the anger that I'm projecting is actually really all just about me, or 90% of it feels like it's about me. And so that's the work, is what does the forgiveness work look like for me, to me? And sometimes it can be very hard to sort of, when we're confronted with somebody that really sort of sets us off, to try to be in a place of forgiveness to that person. But what's the thing that I can sort of hold true for myself? How do I practice loving compassion towards myself? And in that process, I find that I soften and melt, and then my capacity for greater understanding, compassion, listening, etc., is just present. Because I think with all of these things is, you look at a young child, their capacity for compassion, empathy, and love is pretty remarkable. And we just kind of layer it over with the conditioning in society that sort of obscures that, never eradicates it, thankfully, but obscures it. And I think one of the things that we're not doing enough of is, it started to happen after George Floyd was murdered, that there was a sort of a greater kind of public awakening to the realities of the racial oppression and many other oppressions in the United States, and the injustices and the systemic reality of them. But this idea of really disrupting ourselves, disrupting our own sort of routine and comfort in a way that allows us to understand the other in such a big way. And again, Nelson Mandela did this all the time. He would talk with his Afrikaans jailers to try to understand them. He didn't talk with them to just to express his contempt for them. He said, I need to understand the mind here. What is this about? Martin Luther King was punched. Dr. Martin Luther King was punched on stage when he was giving a speech, and some people came to grab this guy and take him out. And he said, we must understand the mind of a man who feels that he needs to do that. Until we understand that, we're just going to rinse and repeat, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, well said, all around. You're amazing, Robert. I'll have to have you back for a longer conversation. I want to make sure you can make it to your appointment.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here. You have a beautiful day, and keep shining bright.
Yes, you too.
Okay. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today for this segment of Indie Creators. And I want to thank you, Robert, once again for being here. We are going to take a little meander out listening to a song called Shine by Kadri Scott. As inspired, check out Robert's great work with the links below. And until next time, this is Suzanne signing out with a full heart, a soft gaze, a deep bow, and a namaste. Be simply.